Our next speaker is Ling Liu, oversees the Community Conservation Program at the Texas Conservation Alliance at TCA. One of Ling's primary responsibilities involves prairie restoration, which encompasses managing the Native Plant Propagation Center dedicated to growing native plants. Additionally, Ling is involved in the Lights Out Texas initiative. Another of her responsibilities is organizing community events, encouraging public participation in prairie restoration and cleanups. Ling earned her BA and her MA in Taiwan. Not born in Texas, but she got here as quick as she could. In 2013, she moved to Texas, where she pursued a Master of Science in International Sustainable Tourism from the University of North Texas. In 2019, while working in her backyard, she discovered a bumblebee nest, which broadened and heightened her passion for wildlife conservation. Prior to joining TCA, Ling worked at the Dallas Zoo Volunteer Services Department, where her knowledge of wildlife conservation and community engagement bloomed. Today, in addition to her work with TCA, she's a member of the Collin County chapter of the Native Plant Society and a Texas Master Naturalist with the Blackland Prairie chapter. Please welcome Ling Liu.
Good morning, everybody. While we are waiting, I'm just kind of wanted to say good morning to my fellow Texans. As Rick mentioned, I'm really new. I moved here about 10 years ago. I'm still learning a lot of things about Texas. Of course, wildlife is the main thing. And so just a little bit update about why I'm here. So Meg and I had other discussion about the project. Yeah, perfect. Discussion about the other projects. And we mentioned about the Prairie Propagation Center we do in Dallas. So that's how we started. And she mentioned a lot of native NIPSA chapters are interested in doing those grow out projects in your area. So we thought maybe we can share something we do in Dallas and give you guys some perspective and what are the challenges we face and see if you may be able to do in your region. So, okay, there we go. So basically we'll cover about a little bit work, what TCA does, and how those Native Plant Propagation Center become what we did today, and including our operation, our plant distribution, and the lesson learned, and why we are doing this. So just a little bit overview about Native Plant Propagation Center. You can see the picture here. We started in 2022 actually, and we partner with the Dallas Zoo. That's all this entire presentation is about. So if you haven't heard about TCA, you might have seen this wildlife habitat sign in your neighborhood. So we are state affiliate of National Wildlife Federation. So we partner in other regional issues and federal issues as well. But promoting certified wildlife habitat in the community is one of the work we do with National Wildlife Federation. And TCA has been around for 50 years. Ned Fritz is our founder, and his wife, Jeannie Fritz, worked along Ned, and they worked together to kind of funded these three organizations in Texas. And Ned was an environmentalist activist, and his work in East Texas and in Dallas really had a huge impact even today. So the Texas Land Conservancy, TCA, and the Nature Conservancy of Texas, these just the Texas Land TLC and the Nature Conservancy today, they are still doing great work in habitat protection and preserving the land. So we're really proud of our partner organizations. So the book author, Amy Martin, and one of the master naturalists, Christy Kerr-Leonard, they worked together to put the website called netfritz.com. I think it was completed last year, 2023, and it was well documented Ned's legacy. So if you are interested in learning more about Net's work, Net and Jeannie's work, please go to the website. So talking about TCA, I'm not going to ask how many of you have heard of a TCA, but as I mentioned, the TCA has been around for 52 years. And in the last 50 years, TCA's work focused on habitat protection and advocacy. So we started in 1972, and my colleague Janice Benzenson and John DeFilippo, they're still working on heavily on the advocacy level. So basically, we protect wildlife habitat. We advocated for river and watershed protection. One of our staff members located in East Texas does the protect the old growth forest, and basically how can those old growth forests from logging. And one of the cases TCA is fighting right now, I won't say fighting, TCA is working on is the Marvinico reservoirs. And it's on the plan, was supposed to be constructed by 2050 because the amount of people moving in North Texas. So if it happened, it's going to flood 66,000 acres of land, and the water will be pipelined into the DFW area for people to use. However, when we are talking about watershed, when we are talking about reservoir, is that really necessary? Is that the solution we want for our future? Because you can see on the bottom of the two pictures, we are talking about people's homes, the ranch, and the habitats as well. Of course, our rivers. So that's one of the major work TCA does for habitat protection. TCA's work is mainly in North Texas and East Texas, although we are statewide agency. We're slowly kind of expanding a little bit more, but we are very small. So slowly, gradually, we would like to increase our work in other regions as well. So our prairie program is under community conservation. So we started the program in 2020. Our previous ED, Ben Jones, he's now serving in at Houston Zoo as a director of conservation. He's a VP, sorry. Don't quote me on that. So basically, Ben was moved to TCA from Dallas Zoo. So he used to be the conservation director at the Dallas Zoo. Of course, as a director, he worked with the community quite a lot. And we believe we want the people to get involved, those hands-on activities. So when he joined the TCA in 2020, he started building the program, community conservation. So these are the 4 areas we work on: restore Texas prairie, champion native trees, and we do a lot of cleanups across the state just to keep our Texas waterway pristine. Of course, Lights Out Texas, which encourage to have a darker night sky. So I want to kind of mention Lights Out a little bit because a lot of people are not aware darkness is habitat too. So migratory birds, the majority of them, I would say 85%, are migrating at night, and they need stars and moon to navigate. However, the city lights really disoriented them. So a slide shared by the Jeremy White from National Park Service, he mentioned overall in the world, about 63% of all wildlife is nocturnal. So Jim and Ling mentioned earlier, we have a lot of moths out there, and they do a lot of work at night. So how can we provide a better habitat is the key. A night sky, dark space would be the focus. So this picture was taken in Big Bend National Park. So if you haven't been there, you can see how differences the night sky in the city and in those darker area. Austin is doing great. Travis, I think Travis is one of the certified dark sky in Texas. We're still working on North Texas, and so that's why we're doing the Lights Out program there. So the second portion of the presentation is about how do we do it. So like I mentioned, the entire program started in 2021. And the first year in 2021, we did not have the propagation center. So basically, but we wanted to put more native plants in the ground. We wanted to support pollinators. So that was our focus. So Ben and I were working together, worked with different partners. So we don't have land. So we looked for different partners that needed put native plants in the ground. So, and basically we provide free plants and just work with the partners. However, as you know, accessibility of native plants, it's a problem. So the first year, accessibility of native plants, especially in the spring, everybody fights for native plants. It's really hard to find native plants. And not to mention the variety you can get from different nurseries and the genetics. As we know, we would like to put, depends on the ecoregion. We want to have the seeds are sourced locally and put back in the ground locally there. So variety and genetics aren't another issue. Of course, the cost. So it's the nurseries we work with were really sweet. They gave us discount. However, that's not enough. We are a nonprofit, so even the wholesale, it's still not enough for us to do large restoration with low cost. And of course, I want to be fair. I don't want the partners to sell us with a low cost. I know how much work requires to grow native plants. So which that's another reason prompted us to start Native Plant Propagation Center. And the last one was about the storage. We did not have an office. Even now today, our office is just small space. We don't have an open space to store all the plants we want to do. And so the first year, everything was shipped to my house. So then what you saw was in my backyard. And if you have nursery shipped the plant to your house, we are talking about 400, 500 native plants. So I sort of I should have taken the photo. I remember one truck reached in my house. So first we unloaded everything in my front yard, and he left and left me with an old front yard, and we're living in the HOA neighborhood. So which means they are not allowed to be there. And so slowly I moved all the 500 plants to the backyard. My husband was not too happy. So as you can imagine, 25 square feet house doesn't have much space for the yard. So, but we kind of managed it. However, those plants have to stay in my backyard for sometimes a month, depends on the events we are doing. So another work is, okay, if I have an event tomorrow, early morning or the day before, I will start loading those plants from my backyard to the front yard again. And we're talking about at least 200 plants. So at the end of the fall, I told Ben, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And not to mention, when you have plants in your backyard, we have 2 huge oak trees. And you know what comes with the oak trees? Squirrels. So there's always constant struggle to fight with squirrels, or I have to water the plants and make sure they don't die. So at the end of this year, in the fall, I told Ben, let's look for a nursery, a greenhouse, so that way we have much flexibility. I just cannot do this anymore. And it happened, Ben was having a conversation with our current conservation director at the Dallas Zoo, Chris Corpus. They were just talking about something else. And then all of a sudden, this topic came up, and that's how it happened. So we decided to work together. And the reason why is the zoo has their own protecting the 12 initiatives. So I think the zoo, I don't really remember, maybe 5 years ago or 10 years, not 10, definitely not 10. 5 years ago, they had the campaign called Protecting the 12. So they selected 12 different species that they want to focus on with their funding, their research, and the breeding program. So it's kind of globally, they want to put the funding to cheetahs, giraffes, gorillas, I think okapis too. And some are in Africa, some are in Asia, like tiger, and some are in Texas. And they group all these species under the Texas native wildlife. So they are not just going to protect wildlife globally. They also focus on Texas program. So from whooping cranes, monarch butterflies, red-cockaded woodpeckers, horned lizards, and Houston toads. Of course, because prairie restoration, monarch butterflies falls under. So I know the zoo works with other entities to do monarch conservation, not just education. They also collect seeds and distribute those seeds. So we receive certain seeds from the zoo, and that's how we started. the conservation department inherited the greenhouse, I think in 2020 after COVID happened, because the horticulture team, the organization changed their focus. So the conservation team somehow just inherited the greenhouse because they want the conservation team to grow native plants for monarchs, but they don't have the resources or people can do that. So that's became the perfect match for us to jump in and collaborate together. So that's when we started in January 2022. And these 3 volunteers are the critical, and they helped to establish the Native Propagation Center in the very beginning. So that's the first day when we worked at the greenhouse. The zoo was very generous, donated some of the materials, the grow lights, and of course, we were able to use all the supplies inside the greenhouse. The greenhouse is about, I would say, 20 years old, and was put together by the local master naturalist, master gardener as well. So the greenhouse is about 30 by 60, according to my volunteer. And it's not too big, but it's functioning. And even it's old, some of the wires are getting old. So whenever we are doing the seed propagation, use the electricity, we have to pay attention. And because we don't want to burn the greenhouse for sure. So that's our greenhouse. And we also have another space, we call that hoop house, we can use. So basically, these are the 2 areas we mainly work on. So all the transplanting, all the work are mainly done inside the greenhouse because it's shaded in general. It still gets very hot in the summer. It's in Dallas. So, but we tried as much as we can to finish all the work in the greenhouse. And once they are done with transplanting, we moved everything into the hoop house. So as a hoop house, you can see there's no shade structure. And however, it gets really hot in the summer too. So there's something we wanted to consider is to put the shade cloth because we lost a lot of plants last year. And for the zoos, these are the departments get involved. It's not just us and the conservation department. The volunteer service have to be involved. So all of TCA staff members, interns, volunteers, we all registered as a Dallas Zoo volunteers. That's just easier to manage from the zoo's perspective because the greenhouse is located behind the scenes area. And did I mention that? Okay. The greenhouse is located behind the scenes area. So everybody has to be kind of vetted before they can enter the system. And there were some security concerns in the past. So we are really being careful to make sure everybody finish the training with the zoo before they can start volunteering with us. And the horticulture department is also critical to help our work. All the maintenance is coming from the zoo. The water, the equipment, if the fan's not working, if the electricity is out, we will reach out to them. And the PR department is basically to make sure all the information we put out on social media, the zoo, if it's related to the zoo, they have to make sure everything goes right. So that's what we did in the last 3 years. So 2021, as I mentioned, we purchased plants. And that's all the budget we had to purchase 4,000 plants. So overall, in the last 3 years, we put around 22,000 plants in the ground. Of course, I'm not that naive to think they all survived. We know that's not true. So I would say maybe if 60% survived, we still get 13,000. I hope my math is right, but 13,000-ish plants lived and to provide a nectar or nectar and food source for pollinators or for wildlife to use. That's still pretty good. Of course, it's not good enough. We are still working on our restoration efforts to ensure a better success when we put the plants in the ground. So where do we get our seeds? So it's coming from commercial, or from our partners. Commercial, a lot of Native American seeds and other nurseries we get the seeds from. And we also work with our partners, the Nature Conservancy and the Dallas Zoo, to get the seeds. So the way we work with TNC specifically, it's from the seeds are from a preserve in North Texas, and we work with the manager. Basically, they provide the seeds for us. Of course, I will give him my seed list, what species I would like to have, I would like to grow this year, and he provides the seeds for us, but we give the seed plants back. So a certain number of plants, of course, both parties have to agree on how many seeds and how many plants. But this model has been successful last year. So the picture on the left was one of the public event the TNC did in Dallas with a Rose Park. So we brought a bunch of plants and we did a public event together. And that's just a way to secure locally sourced seeds, because we do not have preserved that we can collect seeds from. And Dallas Zoo provided some native milkweed seeds for us to grow as well. And we also rely on our individual volunteers, no matter they are greenhouse volunteers or specific volunteers that just love to collect seeds and give to nonprofits to grow. So Wes here and another volunteer, Scott Keller, is help to provide the seeds for TCA to grow. And they are all locally sourced seeds. So 2024, we had about growing from seeds is about 80 something, nearly 90 species growing from seeds. And you can imagine that's a lot of process, documenting and pre-treatment and what else in growing. So I'm trying to get better sense of the steps because we are still very new. So at one time, we started the process, all the seeds together. As you know, native seeds, a lot of them need a stratification. And we were so busy in the fall for planting and we did not have time. And then starting when the season slowed down, we started processing the seeds. So we are slow, a little bit behind our schedule because we do plant sales and the plants have to go out in early April. So that's a struggle I'm facing right now. We have to start our process much earlier. Maybe a few species will start in the summer. So that way we are not occupying all the heating mats or all the lights that needed in the greenhouse. So we are learning. And I would say all the plants we grow in the propagation center, 85% is coming from the seed. Of course, we still purchase plants that are from other nursery because of the other uses, no matter the plants that we can grow or I don't know how to grow or takes too much time to grow. So basically, that's the reason. We still source certain number of plants from other resources, like bushy blue stem and big blue stem. I'm still having a hard time to get them germinated. So what do we do with our plant distribution? These are the three categories that we distribute our plants. So the first one is about restoration in pocket prairies. So we start doing the plant match, that's the name we gave, plant match with different nonprofit organizations, no matter they are preserves or nature centers or public schools, as long as they are kind of nonprofits, they falls under the plant match. So basically, every time when we do a public planting event, we target 300 plants. The reason why 300? Because usually we get a lot of volunteers, 30, 50, and it's quick. You can plant a lot of plants within an hour. So we want to plant more native plants in. So that's why we started targeting 300 plants. And it takes time to do all the coordinations with the partners too. So it's more efficient. We target larger planting area and with the large amount of volunteers. So basically all the 300 plants, 200 will be donated by TCA and the partner has to provide 100 plants. The first spring, the model was we give the plants for free when we purchase plants. However, we don't think that's sustainable. Basically, I don't like the free stuff concept. So I feel like when you have to provide your own resources, you will put much more effort to the plants you put in as well. So we started to do the plant match. We bring in some and the partners bring some. So for the 100 plants or 1/3 of the plants from the partner, they can either grow their own because a lot of nonprofits have no resources, or they can purchase from TCA, or they can purchase from other nursery as long as they are natives. So usually the preserve managers have a better sense what kind of species they want in their preserves. So that's what we do for the plant match. And this year I started another project. It's focused on corporations, private schools, and municipalities, but it's still plan match, but it's different. It's 1 to 2. So basically, those entities listed here have way more resources than TCA. So we are small, and that's another way we can receive funding and put the money back to support our propagation center. And another guidelines I'm still developing is I would like to work with certain schools in DFW area, so we can provide free plants, but we also need the school to pitch in, make sure they have teachers who are responsible for maintenance and education. But that's how we wanted to do more pocket prairie in North Texas. And our second portion to distribute the plants is through community outreach and plant sales. And the Wildbirds Unlimited in Dallas, they have been really graciously providing their space for us to do native plant sales. So I have been doing 3 or 4 seasons now. And the gentleman here is the reason why we are doing the native plants sales in the location. So he came to us, he said, he and his wife just moved to Texas and not too long ago. This photo was taken last year, so that was last spring. And they read Doc Ptolemy's book and they were so inspired. So that's why they found out our plant sale, just came over. And so we took the photo out basically. But when you do plant sales, you get the connection with the community members. That's something you won't get when you go to Home Depot or other places. So I know NIPSA does a lot of plant sales that serve the same concept. It gives us a chance to communicate with the larger community members and to share the passion for native plants, the use as well. So we still enjoy doing a lot of those native plant sales. It just gives us a chance to engage with a community. It's a lot of work, I'm not going to lie, because you never know what plants is going to sell. And it's a lot of shoveling the plants too. But we do love that perspective of engagement. And the second event we do a lot, has been 2 years now. It's every year in May, the first Saturday in May in North Texas, NIPSA, Native Prairie Association of Texas, and Master Naturalist North Texas chapter, they come together, they organize a day like this and in White Rock Lake in Dallas. And so basically it's a free event. They have different hikes, different talks, talk about native plants, and there are other vendors besides TCA to sell native plants. So a lot of people would go there to purchase native plants. It has been really successful in the last few years. So we also collaborate with those organizations. And the last one was really new. It's still developing. So we identified, we found one nursery who was interested in working with us to sell the plants, because I had a lot of plants left last summer. I just didn't know what to do. That's how I started thinking, maybe we can sell the plants to the nursery, local nursery, and get some money back to reimburse our cost in the Native Plant Propagation Center. And it did not really work last year, but it just happened this year. So we're really excited. We still don't know if that's coming from TCA as a brand, or it will be coming from Native Plant Propagation Center. So the zoo is interested in brand the whole thing with us. And so basically when people go to the Redentas garden shop, they will see they can purchase the plants grown by us basically. And Redentas is also a nice nursery too. We're still working on the much more details with the zoo, but hopefully we wanted to launch the program in around latest by March, end of March. And Monarch Hero Schools programs the third way we distribute our plants. So Monarch Heroes is a kind of 2-year project, and the National Wildlife Federation provided a training guidelines. They select the schools. The schools have to apply if they are interested in the program. They apply, and if they are accepted in the program, it's a 2-year program. So NWF will provide a training about monarch conservation, and including the use of INAT and the process tracking the migration, etc. And TCA's role is to work with the Year 2 schools with supply plans. And we also help the teachers to stage the plans if they don't have that background. And sometimes we provide the education with the schools too. So that's a third way we provide our plants go. And a little bit about the operations. So from here you can see, what's that say? So basically, our greenhouse is located between the two elephant barns. It's a zoo, so So it's behind the scenes, and we have the upper elephant barn and lower elephant barn, and the greenhouse is kind of in the middle. So occasionally they will close the road. There's only one road. When they close the road, everything was shut. It's shut down. So nobody can pass because elephant is walking, and the zoo is amazing. So every time when elephant walks, nobody should move. All the traffic should stop, and not even passengers, because the elephants can see you, they can sense you. So besides keepers, nobody's allowed to be on the elephant walkway. And depends on their mood, they can walk for 30 minutes or an hour. So, which means, okay, either you are stuck inside the greenhouse or you're stuck outside the greenhouse. You cannot get to your greenhouse to work. So that's a little bit tricky once you're working on that. We thought about purchase a radio. We don't have a radio. So, the zoo is huge. So they use radios to communicate. However, a radio is $800. I'm not sure we are trying to put that investment yet. But it just caused the inconvenience for us and volunteers. I remember one time I was about to leave for Houston to deliver the plants. Very last minute, one keeper told me we are about to close the elephant walkway. I said, what? Okay. I just basically threw all the plants in the car and drove away. So that's the situation we are dealing, but we will try to find a better way. Fortunately, elephant walk usually happens in the winter, because we don't leave elephant outside when it gets too cold. So it happens more frequently in the winter when they close the elephant walkway. But occasionally in summer, we still have to deal with that. And we work in the greenhouse 3 days a week. Each time is about 4 to 5 hours, especially when it gets too hot in the summer. We start sometimes 6:30 just to avoid the sun. And of course, it poses some challenges. In the summer, it's probably okay because we have watering system. However, if you are starting the seeds in the winter, the seeds need moisture every day. So basically you have to check on them every day. So we are still working on that. How can we make the seeds moisture enough so then they can be watered every other day in general? And so far, our manpower is heavily rely on volunteers. So besides myself, I have an assistant. She helps manage the greenhouse. So she works for 20 hours. It was 15 hours before that. So we finally increased her hours. So she and I kind of work 28 hours inside the greenhouse. Not to mention, sometimes we do take work home, but overall, the time we can spend in the greenhouse is about 28 hours. And we are growing almost nearly 15,000 plants or seedlings. So that's a lot to work on. And we have currently about 3 to 5 volunteers coming to work with us once per week. And the materials we use is we purchase bags of soil. So basically like the bags you will see at Home Depot or Lowe's. Very unfortunate because the location of the greenhouse. So it's kind of, the greenhouse is over the top. The hoop house is lower. So everything was shipped to the hoop house, but we do all the work in the greenhouse. So it gets additional work for me to put the soil in my car and take up to the greenhouse because the truck cannot get there. And we also cannot purchase the bulk load of soil. That's the struggle we are still facing. Maybe we'll find another company who's willing to drive up the hill and dump the soil. So that may help. And these are the challenges we face so far. So the first one's about the transportation for delivery and inside the zoo. Like I mentioned, the location of both greenhouse and hoop house, they are just not together. So a lot of times, once we finish transplanting, I have to take all the potted pots, put them in my car, and drive down to the hoop house. It's not far, however, it's still a lot of work to move plants around. And another thing is about the delivery. So everything is happening in my car. That's my car. That's how we deliver the plants. We try to be efficient. And so overall, we can probably put, I think, 120 plants maybe in my car max. So we use kind of metal shelf to get to the second layers. It's still enough, to be honest. Yeah. So that's our first challenge. The second challenge is about the space and sunlight. So as you see, our greenhouse and hoop house are not that big, and now it's almost full. And so we don't know what to do. And this picture was taken in June 16, 2023. That was close, very close to the summer. And we still have had so many plants. And unfortunately, it was so hot last year, a lot of plants died. The reason why was because the equipment we use. So you can see on the next picture, that's the watering system we have. And as you know, it's not efficient. It's okay for the home setting, but when you have so many potted plants, even though we set up the timer for 30 minutes, water conservation, sorry, but we need to keep our plants survive. So the problem is that only water very top few inches of soil, and the native plant, the roots are going under. So a lot of them died because the water did not get watered. And we are short staffed, so we couldn't really, kind of soak the plants in the tray. So that's not happening. So that's why I mentioned earlier, we may try to put shade cloth this year to improve the practice, basically. And another thing is about we are located inside the zoo, fortunately and unfortunately. So when there's anything breakdown, we rely on the zoo staff members to help fix. But the zoo has been very efficient to come out to help. So the last picture you saw was, it was in February, early February this year, when we had a hard freeze in North Texas. And the pipe was frozen, and we had about 70 or 80 trays, seeds going on. So we were panicked. We didn't know what to do because there was no water, and you need moisture for your seeds to germinate. So thankfully, the horticulture team brought us some water from somewhere else. So otherwise, I would not be able to shuffle the plant, to bring the water from my house, drive 30 miles away and water the plants. So we are really thankful. So it's kind of good when you have a partners like a zoo. And the fourth is about the volunteers. And, nursery is heavy work. And as I mentioned, all the TCA staff and volunteers have to register as a Dallas Zoo volunteers. And so it's a lot of process they have to go through. The first one, they have to apply, fill out the applications. They have to go through onboarding with the zoo, because it's a zoo. There are some animals out there, dangerous animals too. So the volunteers need to learn what if something happened, there's a code red, animals escaped, or code blue, something like birds. What do you do? What do you respond? Where do you need to go for the safety concerns? So they have to go through the training, and then they can volunteer at the zoo. So it's a lot of process. The volunteers have to make it, and not to mention, because the security reasons, the zoo, the volunteers doesn't have the swipe card to enter the zoo. So a lot of times they have to wait outside the gate to make sure to let the staff members or the zookeepers to let them inside the gate. So it's just a lot of limitations out there. So, but that's what the challenge is. So, and the fifth one is about the partnership uncertainty. So we have a great relationship with the zoo. However, our MOU I think our MOU will end the end of next year. It was a very casual relationship to start with, because we know the zoo very well. So the first year when we were working together, we just kind of just work together. And till last year, we decided maybe we should sign an MOU to kind of secure the partnership. And we did. And so I think that was the last for 3 years. So we may renew the MOU the next year. However, before the renewal, we don't know. And to improve the infrastructure inside the zoo, we don't have automatically watering system. So it relies on a lot on the volunteers or staff members. So that's something, if you want to invest your equipment, we need to make sure the partnership goes well and it has a long term on the contract too. And the lesson learned, basically, legal requirement. After we started running the propagation center for almost 1.5 years, we realized, oh, we need a license to be able to sell the plants. And I didn't know until last year I mentioned we had a lot of surplus plants that I didn't know what to do. That's why somebody gave me an idea. Why don't you sell to nursery? So I reached out to several nurseries, and then one of the nursery got back to me. Do you have a license? I said, no, I didn't know. That's how we started. So get your license first. And the process wasn't hard. And I think 6 months later, there was an inspector came to the zoo to visit to make sure everything looks right. And so that's a legal requirement, just don't forget. And the second part was about the sustainability of the program. So like I mentioned, I believe the work we do, however, I need to make the program sustainable as when we are providing free plants to the partners. And that's how I created the other guideline. I need to make sure I am able to pay my staff members. So Johanna here, she works 20 hours per week. And without her, the propagation center cannot function because we all have a lot of responsibilities for the program. From the seed collector, grower, and seller, educator, whatever you can think, we do everything. So how can I make sure she's hired to continue the work we do? It's important. That's why we learn how to make sure we have a sustainability for the entire program. And the third one is not really the lesson learned. I would say established partnerships are important. We really rely on a lot of our partners to continue the work we do. Of course, the zoo is the main one. So we look for different ways to partner with the zoo or to strengthen the partnerships to make sure we can continue the work we do. So a lot of how we did it, and that's why we are doing it. And I think Jim and Ling mentioned a lot during their presentations. And this is just a little bit kind of overview why we chose to do this. So as Chamber of Commerce mentioned, report coming from last year, just the homes, Houston, Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio in the top 20s. And it still amazes me. I feel like, oh, you still can find so many land to make homes or build car washes. It just amazed me. Yeah. Like every strip of land in my neighborhood is just taking away for different kind of shopping complex, car wash, or Starbucks. Very unfortunate. They can find every single land to convert to something else. And this is just homes. The map is just showing homes, not to mention other scale of the development in those cities. So we are losing the habitats tremendously. So as I mentioned, that we had a very casual relationship. So we did not have the mission until last year when we are very serious about the partnership. So we should put a mission together. But basically we want to put more plants in the ground and to really build the community resilience and the plant diversity in North Texas. So restoration, education, conservation, and propagation. And we're still working on. So these are some of the reason why we are doing it. So to establish culture. So we want to change the perception of aesthetics from the traditional lawns to diverse gardens. Ling and Jim mentioned earlier about 50% lawn garden space in Austin. So imagine that's in North Texas, it's the same. So through our work with different partners, we are trying to change the concept of using lawn. So the first project was we did with the City of Plano, Urban Forest Department. So our original project was to plant trees. So when they reach out to TCA, I said, okay, we are happy to partner, but I would like to focus on maybe some of the understory, we can use some grasses. And that's how we start the partnerships besides trees, because in North Texas, the majority of the habitats are blackland prairie. So I just don't feel right if it's supposed to be a prairie land and we put a bunch of trees. So I'm trying to work with different partners to incorporate that concept. Maybe we can start using native plants or grasses for the soil erosion. And that's the case happened here. So later on, because the construction of the original site was not completely completed by them, so we switched to another project. Basically, it was erosion issues with the new gabion wall was constructed. So we worked with a local high school. They were under the social club environment or something like that. But basically, they want to study how people perceive native plants in the park. So we chose the site. It was a conservation buffer zone and near the creek. So we came together, planted a bunch of native plants, and the students would go back to study about the use of native plants, what's people's perspective of the park. So when we started conversation with the city of Plano, it was really interesting. The Parks and Recs guys came, they said, we are happy if we don't need a mall because you can see there are trees there. So the lawn doesn't grow. And they have been continuously fighting to put more new fresh sod in there, and they just always fail. So they are happy to see using different techniques, which they may not need to mow. They may not need to spend so much time on the maintenance. So after the project started, our contact person from the city mentioned that the entire city are really happy with the result and wanted to move with the direction of using more native plants in the park, in their park system. So that's one of the positive change we have seen. And the second case is about the HOA. So one of the community in Irving, in North Texas, is Valley Ranch Green Club. So Nancy was a person she's also NIPSA member. So she started working with the HOA and the community groups wanted to transform the landscape in Irving, in her community. So basically they worked with HOA. Instead of using those annual plants, they start putting more perennial plants and native plants and educate their homeowners in the region. And they also wanted to work with National Wildlife Federation to certify as an wildlife habitat community. So far in the neighborhood, they have 125 homes certified as wildlife habitats, and they wanted to do more. And they also work on near the open space, converted from a lawn into a wildflower meadow, basically. So we wanted to expand our work with HOA. There are so many HOAs out there, but it's so little are doing this kind of work. And not to mention, every year the labor put in to replace the annual plants is extensive. So how can we reduce those parts as something we want to convert? Other motivations is basically to less mowing. So the case here is about the city of Cedar Hill. That's a new partnership we just formed with them. They are just recently certified as a Bird City, Texas. So as a Bird City, Texas, you need to have promote native plants as a bird city. So they wanted to start working on put more native plants in the city of Cedar Hill. So basically the parks guy was really excited. He said, as long as I don't need to have my people go out to mow, I'm happy. And he also see the benefits for wildlife. So slowly we can move towards that direction as long as we open the conversation. And the second part of what we do is to improve the native plant at sea. Like I mentioned, we want to provide plants, good quality plants, native plants for restoration. We also want to provide plants for our community. It's still harder for community members to purchase native plants. North Texas, I feel like it's getting easier. There are so many good nurseries out there, but outside of North Texas, there's still a lot of place people need to find native plants, and which is still hard. So thank you all the work you do in your local community, for sure. And the third part, what we do is we want to expand the urban habitats. So, for example, like monarchs. And I know there are so many good preserves in North Texas. So I was once trying to see, okay, if the monarchs have to migrate, have to fly 100 miles to find milkweed from one preserve to another preserve, it doesn't make sense. Not to mention, there are so many pollinators, they only fly certain radius in their region. So to enhance and expand the urban habitats is extremely important, especially in the city. It's not just concrete. So one of the projects we worked with the Green Hill School and was extremely success because of course, you need champions in the school to really push this effort. So I'm grateful for, there's a group of 4 teachers that work together to make this happen. So before we put the plant in on the left picture, it was barren land. They had drip irrigation, but nothing was there. So the teacher reached out to me and said, oh, we wanted to create a pollinator garden. And in one summer, we just worked together, put about 400 plants in. And then slowly they added pathway and for the teachers or students to use. And then they use those places as an outdoor classroom. They do nature journaling, biodiversity studies, and to talk about our Blackland Prairie ecosystem in the prairie. So it's a huge difference. You can see it was barren land. And after they put the plants in, from summer to the fall, they already document 60 different kind of species on island. So that's really huge difference, and entire school likes it. So when we are working with the partners, not just the partners like the teachers buying the concept, they also work very hard to persuade the schools to expand those pocket prairie inside the campus. So that's just very exciting to work with them. So the same case on the Green Hill, actually, it's about water conservation. The case I want to mention is, so we did the pollinated garden, the same location in June 28th, 2022. It was extremely hot, but because the school committed to water, you can saw the irrigation line was there already. So it was much easier for them to do, and they committed to water. And then till October, they reduced the time for watering because it's just getting much cooler. And until November, they shut down the water. And until I talked to the teacher the next summer, they never turned the water back on. And so when we are promoting the use of native plants, and tying back when we talk about reservoirs, do we really need another reservoirs to water alone, or can we find other solutions? Okay, all right. So education is on the one. We want to focus on education. Basically, we have interns coming out to help with the propagation and learn about native plants. We're also working with different departments to bring the groups to there to see the process, to learn about native plants. Of course, special events are the ones we do for educate the public, the use of native plants. So very quickly, I want to close with this slide. So this slide was put together by Heather Block, our Lights Out Dallas assistant coordinator. She recently attended a summit, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Summit in Washington about the collision happened in Chicago. If you remember, in McCormick Park last fall, 10,000 birds died. So that was the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Summit to get experts together. And I think as I'm overseeing our native plants, our Lights Out program, our litter pollution reduction, I see the similarity in all the work we do. We are trying to change the culture. So as Dustin, he's a director of conservation and science, he mentioned data is not enough. Bird death alone doesn't drive the change. So why? The cost, the lack of pressure, the little incentive, and it can apply to our native plants program as well. The cost of native plants are high, and the lack of pressure from our city or from us, like we have to press our city government to use native plants. Of course, your HOA should require us to use native plants, not the crib myrtles in your city. And little incentive, there's no incentives. Also, maybe, I'm not sure, but there's no incentives in North Texas to encourage people to use native plants or convert your lawn. So yeah, so data is there, but it's not enough. And I think the partnership is the key. Like he said, what helps birds helps people. So in the past, when we were doing all the campaigns, I focus on animals. For the native plants, I always talk about the benefits to pollinators, when we talk about lights out, we talk about the benefits for birds. However, those light pollution or native plants really helps people too. So light pollution not just affect the birds, it also affect our native plants, our plants, or our pollinators and people. It affects your sleep rhythm. So overall, we have to bring the people concept into the campaign we do. So incentivize changes, these are the important. So I do see the similarity in all the programs we do to change the culture to make it happen. So lastly, I want to thank all the partners and those individual ones. They really made the program successful. Without them, I really can't do all the work. So I want to thank them. So thank you. I'm sorry.